Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Prime Podcast. I'm William, and I'm here to talk about the week in consumer electronics and technology news, including a possible next generation HTC smartphone, Acer on Windows 8 and the Surface, Verizon's Galaxy S3 which I reviewed, Google Fiber and where it's headed, and we're going to wrap it up at the end with the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 and when it's going to be announced. So let's go ahead and get started with our first topic, which is this potential next generation HTC phone. As you might already know, Samsung, they've become surprisingly successful with their 5.3-inch Galaxy Note smartphone. They launched it about a year ago, and some have really thought that 5.3 inches is way too big, but other people think 5.3 inches is just the perfect size for any smartphone. And I have used the 5.3 inch Galaxy Note, and honestly, it has a very good place in the market. It's kind of a big phone, but it also can be used as more of a tablet in many ways because it has a bigger screen, text looks very crisp on the high resolution, and it can be really used as kind of a tablet if you don't really want to have two devices with you at the same time. As Samsung prepares a Galaxy Note 2 for IFA 2012, which we'll talk about a little bit later, HTC is preparing a similar 5-inch smartphone for September. First off, one of the big things, according to DigiTimes, is this 5-inch display on this smartphone. It's going to be a 5-inch display at a 1920 by 1080 or 1080p resolution. And this 1080p smartphone should arrive in either September or October. And although the Galaxy Note 2 is going to be a little bit bigger than this phone, it's also going to stick with that 1280 by 800 resolution. Well, this HTC phone's at 1080p, meaning you can probably fit a little bit more on the display, and it's just a bigger resolution, which will be useful for many things. Things will look crisper. Things will look better on a 1080p display in many ways, and this is even a smaller display too, so things are going to look even crisper because it's a smaller display as well. Along with that 1080p 5-inch display, there should be a 1.5 GHz Snapdragon S4 processor inside. As usual, HTC will put some of the latest components, including Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 dual-core processor, which is clocked at 1.5 GHz, along with Adreno 320 graphics inside of this thing. The processor will be able to power like what it usually does, and the same processors can be found in other things like the One X on HTC in the United States, as well as the Galaxy S3, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But graphics, on the other hand, we haven't really seen those graphics already, but these graphics are going to be much better than the current graphics on current phones, but they'll mainly be used to power the higher resolution. Most phones right now are running at 720p. This is running at 1080p, which will require a little bit more power to run everything at these high resolutions. So that's how the graphics will work right there. So, in other words, you'll have similar performance to what's on the market right now with the Galaxy S3 and One X, which is very, very fast, while at the same time offering a bigger display at high resolution. Now, we don't really know what this phone will be called or when it will arrive exactly, and what exactly it will be branded, what carriers, and that kind of stuff, how much it will cost. And that actually makes me think this could potentially be the next HTC Nexus smartphone. As you might know, there have been many reports from reliable sources that Google plans to launch 5 new Nexus devices this fall from different OEMs, so chances are we'd be seeing phones from companies like Samsung, HTC, and Motorola. Samsung could release something like the Galaxy S3, that's been tweaked to be the next Nexus, while Motorola could launch something else, while HTC could potentially launch this 5-inch phone as their flagship Nexus smartphone for Google. Adding to that rumor was the fact that we got leaked from some benchmarks, and the benchmarks recognize the resolution at 1794 by 1080, which is 1080p minus the 126 pixels needed for the on-screen menu buttons found on stock Nexus devices like the Nexus 7 and Galaxy Nexus. That's most companies like HTC have opted for capacitive buttons on their own 1 series smartphones this year instead of using these on-screen buttons like what Google's using. So that kind of hints at the possibility of this being the next Nexus phone. if it really is a Nexus phone, chances are I would see it arrive first internationally on the Google Play Store for probably around $400. That's unlocked. So that basically means you pick up the phone, get a prepaid SIM card from AT&T or T-Mobile here in the United States, put it in the phone, and for $400, you don't even have to worry about a 2-year contract, and you can just have the phone and it'll work. And if you want to, of course, you can go with some cheaper prepaid carriers like Straight Talk, I think is one of the gooder or better prepaid carriers, and it'll still work. And then maybe eventually later they'll roll out carriers like Verizon and Sprint, although I have heard some reports that Google is planning to bypass carriers altogether with these Nexus smartphones and offer them only through the Google Play Store unlock, which I think will be a really great idea. It might not promote the most safe, more people will probably not go with these phones because they're not on a carrier and it just seems more complicated. But I think it really is the way to go. Carriers have been for a long time kind of a monopoly, like Verizon and AT&T are very much a duopoly. They work together, not really, but they're both competing carriers and they have so much of a lead in the market that they don't have to worry about Sprint or T-Mobile taking over. So basically they can charge whatever they want for data, they can do whatever they want, without really getting into any trouble. So they can say, like, I want to raise the activation fee to $50 instead of $36. And they can do that without getting in a lot of trouble. They can change data plans around and that kind of stuff without a whole lot of effort. And of course, if these phones were unlocked, and the carrier didn't really have to deal with a 2-year contract, if someone doesn't like this carrier, they can just ditch the carrier and go with another carrier, no questions asked, like within the month. So that's kind of interesting. But for now, carriers are really popular, and one of those carriers is AT&T, the number 2 in the United States, and they carry the HTC One X, which is one of the flagship phones in the market today, competing with the Galaxy S3. And if you want to pick up this phone, you can go and pick it up from Amazon for $169.99, which is a pretty good deal. Normally it retails for $200 on a 2-year contract. Well, AT&T is selling it for $170. That's a pretty good deal. You can check it out. I have a link in the description below to this page where you can purchase this HTC One X on AT&T. If you want a phone now, you don't really want to wait for this 5-inch 1080p phone. Performance should be similar. This phone is still very good, the HTC One X. So if you want the One X, you can go ahead and pick one up from Amazon. Now moving on to Windows, and this is a very interesting article because Windows 8 will be arriving in just a few months, and Windows 8 will be very different from Windows 7 and all previous versions of Windows in general. You'll have a new touch-optimized user interface that has previously been called Metro, and Microsoft understands how tablets are becoming popular, and potentially in the near future they could replace traditional computers altogether. To kickstart Windows 8, Microsoft's going to be launching the Surface RT and Surface Pro tablets. And Acer and many other OEMs don't really like the whole idea of these Microsoft-branded, Microsoft-made computers, because that's essentially what they're trying to do now. These companies make Windows computers, and if Microsoft made them, they might lose in business. So before I talk about what Acer thought about these tablets, I'm going to talk about what the Surface tablets are. Essentially, they're 2 different devices. One's the RT, which runs Windows RT, which is an ARM-powered or ARM-optimized version of Windows with just a touch interface, nothing more. It doesn't have the Windows desktop. You won't be able to run all old Windows apps. And Surface Pro is the same as RT, both an Intel processor, which means it'll run the full version of Windows 8, both the touch interface and the Windows desktop. The RT is more of a tablet, which will probably cost around $500, while the Pro is more of an older book, costing probably around $1,000, which is standard for older books and standard for tablets. So personally, as a consumer, I really like the idea of the Surface tablet. Essentially, Microsoft's Nexus device that showcases Windows 8. Acer CEO JT Wang, on the other hand, is completely against the Surface. He thinks that Microsoft should think twice, and this will create a huge negative impact for the ecosystem. In other words, the Surface could hurt companies like Dell, Acer, Asus, HP, and Acer, as well as other companies like Samsung, who have been selling Windows computers for quite some time now. If you haven't already realized it, Microsoft is basically making the Surface to show companies like Acer and Dell what they should do. And in the case of these devices, Microsoft wants these companies to make Windows-powered tablets, both ARM-powered ones and Intel-powered ones. Microsoft only plans to sell a few million Surface tablets, so it's obvious that Microsoft isn't trying to kill off these OEMs. However, OEMs could take the Surface as a threat, and they could just potentially ditch Windows altogether. If you didn't already know, most OEMs make both consumer enterprise and enterprise Windows computers, and even though you probably hear more about the consumer hardware, companies actually make more money off of these business computers. So a company like Dell or HP could just ditch these consumer PCs and just sell the business computers, and they won't lose a ton of money. Companies like Acer could also potentially find alternatives, according to the CEO, instead of using Windows 8. So, for example, they could use Chrome OS or Android, or maybe even Linux. Recently, Valve CEO Gabe Newell has talked about how Windows 8 will lead to services like Steam having some issues. So Valve has actually been working to bring Steam and Steam games like Left 4 Dead over to Linux, which is very interesting. Linux hasn't really been popular over the past, like, forever, since Linux is open source. It's not usually installed by default on computers. It's kind of it's just not as good as Windows for many people. It's not as simple and easy to use. At least that's what Microsoft wants you to think. So I use Linux for most of my servers, but I have in the past used it for my desktop. But I can't really do that because I have a ton of games on Steam. I use applications like Wirecast to do the podcast. I just don't have the software I need on Linux to do Windows, and I don't really want to reboot my computer to Windows every time I want to do something that requires Windows. So, on the other hand, these companies might not even move away from Windows. They could potentially just do what they do with XP. So they could just stick with Windows 7, put it on all their computers, don't go to Windows 8. And for example, this happened with Windows XP. When Vista launched, Vista came out, companies saw it and thought it was a failure, just stuck with XP for years and years and years. So Windows 7 could be like a decade-old operating system in like 10 years, and yeah, that could potentially happen. Personally, I've been using Windows 8 for nearly a year now. I don't see myself going back to Windows 7. The UI is a little bit different and very interesting on multiple monitors on a desktop computer. Microsoft knows what the future is. They know that in 3 years from now, when they release the next version of Windows, we might not even be using these desktops and laptops anymore. We're probably going to be using tablet computers. I think that's what Microsoft sees. And they want to prepare for that. And that really makes some sense. I think Microsoft really knows what they're doing. Moving on to Verizon and the Samsung Galaxy S3, which I reviewed. Now, I'll have a video review upcoming by this next Tuesday, August 14th. But for now, I'm just going to kind of briefly go over this Galaxy S3 review because I've talked about it at least twice over the past few podcasts. So I'm going to scroll down to the very end where I go over the final conclusion. So overall, I've been very happy with the Verizon Samsung Galaxy S3 for using it for about a month, and Samsung has managed to put the latest and greatest hardware into a smartphone that looks good in person, feels amazing in the hand, and has a ton of great software that adds to the functionality of the Galaxy S3. A lot of these features like high-ease air and Smart Stay that aren't available on competing smartphones and really make this Galaxy S3 a very nice smartphone. And then I give the Galaxy S3 an 8.8 out of 10 for the score. Overall, it's a great phone, scoring 9. But the software isn't quite as good simply because it runs TouchWiz, and it's a good skin, but it does slow Samsung down from updating the phone. For example, the Android 5 or 4.1 Jelly Bean is already on the market right now on the Nexus 7 and some other phones like the Galaxy Nexus. And that's because those phones are running stock Android. This Galaxy S3 it could be a few more months until it gets Jelly Bean, simply because Samsung has to update TouchWiz as well on all these applications. So specifications 9, display 9, performance 9, battery life 9, software 8, aesthetics 9. So software is really putting this phone down. I like the software on it as a whole, good applications, good tweaks, but it just is a bad for when it comes to getting Android updates, and I think that's really important. So you can check out the full review of the phone. I cover all kinds of things, including the specifications, like RAM, storage, display, camera, input, output. Performance, I benchmarked using tools like Geekbench, LintBack, Quadrant, and Tutu, GeoBenchmark, as well as speedtest.net. Actually, this is kind of interesting. When I first got the phone, I was getting slower data speeds, and now I'm getting faster data speeds. Like the fastest I've ever gotten was on this phone, and it was 41 megabits per second on Verizon's 4G LTE network, which is pretty impressive because 40 megabits per second, that's just crazy fast. With the Galaxy Nexus and other LTE devices I reviewed, I was getting more like 30 down as a max. I also talked about the software like TouchWiz, S-Voice, Kai's Air, AllShare, Smart Stay, and Samsung's slew of motion controls. And I also go on to the aesthetics, including the build quality, input-output layout, and looks, as well as ergonomics. So just kind of check that out, and stay tuned for the video review of the smartphone, which is coming very, very soon to this YouTube channel. So you can subscribe to get the video review when it's published, or just keep on refreshing the page, the review page, which I've linked in the description below with all the articles I talked about today. So click on that link, and refresh on Tuesday, and you should be able to see the review embedded on that page if you don't want to subscribe to this channel. Moving on to Google Fiber. And basically, Google Fiber was announced a couple weeks ago, and they basically are bringing it to Kansas City because a couple years ago they let cities vote on what cities they should bring Google Fiber to first. Kansas City won, and it's getting Google Fiber now. So they didn't really announce anything more than that. They just announced that Google Fiber is arriving in Kansas City soon. But the sources like the Wall Street Journal actually have gotten some more information on when Google Fiber is arriving in other cities. And I'm going to read the whole quote now. For now, the Google Fiber plan is restricted to Kansas City area, but Google has privately discussed expanding its offerings to other markets that Verizon hasn't entered with Fios fiber optic TV and internet services yet. So, in other words, Google isn't going to really go for these big cities that already have Google Fiber. Instead, they're going to go to places that don't have Google Fiber, like medium to smaller sized towns, big towns that don't have Google Fiber, right? Or not fiber, but Fios. Yeah, that's Verizon's version of Google Fiber. I think Google really wants Google Fiber, or just fiber internet in general, to be available to as many Americans as possible. And I think they're really working with Verizon to do that. Fiber is really going to make the internet much faster. And Google really wants this fiber to drive technological innovation in as many places as possible. They want to let small businesses have access to tools that really require a lot of bandwidth, and fiber does offer a lot of bandwidth. The interesting thing about the Google Fiber rollout is that it really seems to be residential focused. Neighborhoods will rally to get fiber in the area. If a neighborhood happens to get fiber, if there's businesses in that area, they'll end up getting fiber as well. So Google has announced any sort of special business pricing, which is what most other carriers do. Like Time Warner Cable, for example, they charge maybe $70 a month for a consumer to get like 10 down, 5 up. Well, just getting like 1 up, 1 down is going to be like a couple $100 for business. So businesses really have to pay a lot more for the same exact thing. Even though Kansas City doesn't have a history of being a very great place for businesses, Google thinks that there really is a potential there for startups, and Google wants to see what people can do with 1 gigabit per second bandwidth in Kansas City. So, in other words, we should be seeing fiber arrive in cities that don't have any sort of fiber already, and that's kind of interesting. We don't really have any information on when it's going to arrive and what city specifically, but we'll stay tuned for more information. Our next sponsor is Media Temple and $4 domain names. That's because Media Temple is offering $4 domain names all summer long. Normally domain names cost them around $12, but Media Temple is offering them for $4, and you get .com, .net, .org, .info, biz.me, .name, and .co for just $4 each domain. That's pretty cheap the first year. Each year after that, you have to renew it for $12, but it's still a pretty good deal. So if you want cheap domain names, you can check out Media Temple. They also have really good hosting, like the Grid service, Dedicated Virtual, and VE servers. So you check those out. MediaTemple.net. I have a link in the description below, right to the page, so you don't even have to type a thing into your web browser. Moving on to our final article, and that's Samsung's Galaxy Note 2. Samsung will be holding an event where they'll announce the brand new Galaxy device on August 15th. We could see many potential devices, including the Galaxy Note 2, the Galaxy Note 10.1, Galaxy Note 11.8. But all 3 of those devices, the most likely to be announced is the Galaxy Note 10.1. That's because it's already gone up for pre-order in some places, and some reviewers have already started to get the Galaxy Note 10.1. Like Techno Buffalo, they already have this thing in a review from one of the places that allows them to pre-order the tablet. So, I'll start out by covering the Galaxy Note 2's event. Both the Note 10.1 and Tab 11.8 could be announced at this event, but the Galaxy Note 2 should not be announced. That's because Samsung has told Reuters that they plan to launch their next Note smartphone on August 29th at Samsung Mobile Unpacked in Berlin. That's just a couple of days before IFA 2012. And that makes sense. That's around the same time they announced it last year and around the same event. So Samsung really has a different product planned for August 15th. The Galaxy Note 2, it should be a pretty impressive smartphone when it's unveiled on August 29th. Samsung didn't announce a whole lot on the specs of the phone, but it should have a larger 5.5-inch display at the same resolution, which is 1280 by 800. Should have a quad-core Exynos 4 quad processor along with 2 GB of RAM, and the same TouchWiz Nature UX skin found on the Galaxy S3. So it's overall going to be like a bigger version of the Galaxy S3, and that's what it looks like it's going to be. It'll most likely launch with Ice Cream Sandwich, although it could potentially rival with Jelly Bean. When it comes to the release date of the phone, it should arrive first in European countries before the end of this year, while people in the United States will most likely have to wait until later in 2013. Simply because that's what happened with the Galaxy Note last year. It arrived first in the Eastern Hemisphere in November of last year, and a few months later in February it arrived on AT&T here in the United States, and right around now, like this week, it arrived on T-Mobile's network in the United States. So even though the Galaxy Note 2 is going to be announced very soon if you're in the United States or pretty much anywhere outside of Europe or Asia, or some parts of Asia actually, it's going to be a little bit of a while for waiting on this Galaxy Note 2. So that's about it for this podcast, episode 6 of the Prime podcast. You can go and check out our blog at theprime.co as well as the YouTube channel. It's theprime.co on YouTube as well. Subscribe, we upload 2 videos a week, sometimes more. We do the podcast on Saturdays, and on Sundays we do the gaming video. We're doing Minecraft right now. We're building a house in every single biome in Minecraft, so you can subscribe for that or the podcast. And if you want to see some reviews of some smartphones like the Galaxy S3 or tablets like the Nexus 7, subscribe as well, because next week we'll be uploading a review of the Galaxy S3, and probably the week after, or the week after that, we're going to be uploading that review of the Nexus 7 on the YouTube channel as well. So subscribe for that, stay tuned, and that's about it. Stay tuned for the next episode next week.